Firstpost reports from the world's second largest continent. Hello, I'm Alyson Grange. A very warm welcome from Durban, South Africa. We get you the news and the newsmakers from Africa. From elections to climate change to innovations and opportunities. As the world's attention shifts, we report from Africa, the heart of the global south. Join me every weekday live on First Post. Hello and welcome to First Post Africa, where we get you the top stories from the continent and from across the world. I'm Alyson Grange, coming to you live from Durban, South Africa. First, let's take a look at the headlines. Hamas accuses Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of attempting to thwart a ceasefire deal by insisting that Israel won't withdraw from the Philadelphia corridor in Gaza. Russian President Vladimir Putin says he backs Kamala Harris in the upcoming U.S. presidential election. The apparent sarcastic remark comes after Washington accused Moscow of influencing the vote. 2 students and 2 teachers were killed at a Georgia high school in the U.S. in a mass shooting. 14-year-old student who opened fire has been charged with murder. Ugandan Olympian Rebecca Cheptegei dies 4 days after being set on fire by her boyfriend in an attack in her home in Kenya. Activists warn of a femicide epidemic in the East African nation. And YouTube will stop recommending videos idealizing specific fitness levels, body weights, or physical features to teenagers after experts warn such content could be harmful. Hello and welcome. Let's take a look at our top story. Flanked by 50 African leaders, Chinese President Xi Jinping posed for a family photograph in a massive show of strength at a time of increasing political and economic turmoil around the world. The Chinese president opened the 9th Forum of China-Africa Cooperation in Beijing as he seeks to position his country as the development partner of choice for the global south.
The friendship between China and Africa transcends time and space, surmounts mountains and oceans, and passes down through generations. The founding of the FOCAC in 2000 was a milestone in the history of China-Africa relations. We stand shoulder to shoulder with each other to firmly defend our legitimate rights and interests as once-in-a-century changes sweep across the world. We always empathize with and support each other, setting a stellar example of a new type of international relations.
Speaking at the forum, Xi Jinping said Beijing would provide African countries $51 billion in new financing, including loans and other types of assistance. Not just this, the Chinese president has also promised to create 1 million jobs in Africa. He also announced 30 infrastructure projects to boost connectivity across the continent.
In the next 3 years, the Chinese government is willing to provide $51 billion of financial support, including $30 billion of credit facilities and $11 billion of various types of assistance, and to promote Chinese enterprises to invest no less than $10 billion in Africa.
The Chinese president also vowed to strengthen military ties with African countries. Xi Jinping announced joint training programs with the China's PLA and militaries of African nations.
China will provide $140 million of non-reimbursable military assistance to the African side, train 6,000 military personnel and 1,000 police and law enforcement personnel for the African side, invite 500 young military officers to visit China, and carry out China-Africa military fraternization and continuous joint cruises.
邀请500名青年军官访华。
The Forum on China-Africa Cooperation Summit chalks out a 3-year program for China and every African state except Eswatini, which retains ties to Taiwan. The photos and videos from the Grand Summit in Beijing are all smiles and handshakes. But there could be tough talks ahead as goals of African countries come up against China's slimmed-down priorities. The two sides could see differences over levels of trade and investment. Africa's biggest two-way lender, China, has been lending huge sums for infrastructure in Africa. But now Beijing wants to move away from big-ticket projects. Instead, it wants African countries to buy more Chinese goods. For China, its top priority is to find buyers in categories which have an overcapacity and looming Western sanctions. This is China's market of electric vehicles and solar panels. So China is shaping its finance for Africa around green technologies. It has already set aside more for solar farms, EV plants and Wi-Fi facilities, and has cut back on lending for bridges, ports and railways. But what Africa is looking for is quicker financing solutions to its growing debt crisis. In recent months, the worsening debt has triggered civil unrest in countries like Kenya, Uganda and Nigeria. China has been making high-interest loans to low-income African nations to fund development of infrastructure projects. Xi Jinping's Belt and Road Initiative has been criticized for its debt-laden projects. The United Nations has called for fresh reforms to the international financing structure, warning that Africa's inadequate access to debt relief is a recipe for social unrest.
Many African countries are mired in debt and struggling to invest in sustainable development. Many have no access to effective debt relief, enjoy scarce resources, and clearly insufficient concessional funding to respond to the basic needs of their population and protect them from the ravages of a climate crisis they did nothing to create. This situation is unsustainable and the recipe for social unrest.
So, during the current summit, African delegates want to hear how China plans to meet its 2021 summit pledges to buy $300 billion worth of goods from Africa, which still remains unfulfilled. They also seek assurances on the progress of incomplete Chinese-funded infrastructure projects. At the heart of this summit is a geopolitical battle for influence in Africa. Its vast and rich trove of resources, potential of a young population, and 54 seats in the United Nations have China, Russia, and the United States-led West competing for power. The United Kingdom, Italy, Russia and South Korea have also held Africa summits in recent years. However, Beijing's outsized role in both finance and trade means that it remains Africa's biggest partner. Now, for more on this, we have with us Patrick Bond, who is a political economist and distinguished professor at the University of Johannesburg. He is joining us live from Cape Town, South Africa. Hello to you, Professor.
Good to be with you again, Alyson.
Great to speak to you. Now, how do you assess the economic impact of the China-Africa summit on African countries, particularly in terms of trade and investment, with China now pledging $51 billion in fresh financing?
Yes, and the fresh is the crucial question because some of these are projects that have been discussed for years, decades in some cases, but they are debt-laden, as you pointed out. And the big hope we've had in FOCAC meetings that go back now 24 years to 2000 is that instead of the old neo-colonial export of raw materials or slightly processed minerals and fossil fuels, that there would be more manufacturing. And the one country that moved quickly, Ethiopia, has then regressed, and it's back to about 6% manufacturing to GDP. In fact, all of Africa went from a high of about 17% in the mid-90s down to about 11. And that's really because Chinese goods have really washed out the local production systems. And I fear that's not going to change. And indeed, much of that 61 billion, about 60%, will come in the form of loans. And that has, as you've said, created major problems of instability when it leads to austerity and the IMF and the World Bank clamping down, Kenya being the most recent extreme example.
Yes. Given these growing concerns about the debt sustainability, how is China addressing the debt issues that are faced by many African nations in its new agreements? Have we seen anything to show that it is addressing these issues?
No, I mean, I think the two critiques are that there will be throwing more good money after bad. In other words, just lending so that you can pay more of the interest that's already come due and what are indeed higher interest loans, higher interest rates than typically you'd get from the multilateral agencies. The second thing, in addition to throwing money, is to support the World Bank and the IMF. And the Chinese have been the biggest new investors in recapitalizing those institutions in spite of the rhetoric about trying to have some sort of an alternative BRICS New Development Bank or Chinese funding. And that in turn, as we saw in Kenya, leads protesters to target these institutions. And I think in that sense, China hasn't really figured out a new way to deal with the debt crises, the worst ever, even worse than the early 1980s, that so many countries are facing, including countries that default now on Chinese debt. And, Zambia, Ghana, Ethiopia, they're some of the success stories from the 2010s, but have had to go bankrupt.
Absolutely. And now we have seen the geopolitics that's playing out in Africa. What are the implications of the China-Africa summit for the global south? And how might it shift the balance of power in international relations? We have seen this renewed interest in the African continent from the West, from Russia, and of course from China.
Yes, and Russia and China seem to work together through, especially the meeting in late October of the BRICS. And there are now not just South Africa, but Egypt and Ethiopia going as full members, although Ethiopia probably won't be allowed to join the BRICS New Development Bank. That may then affect the way the one member, South Africa, plus the African Union, which joined at the Delhi G20, they will go in November. And there may be a sort of slight balance of power shifting towards China and maybe other BRICS agendas, Russia. But, the real dilemma is the geographical relationships, for example, to the copper belt and the new energy materials that are desired, cobalt and the Zambian and Democratic Republic of the Congo. The U.S. is trying to push some of those to the west through Angola and the Lobito corridor. So China is now offering to rehabilitate the Tanzania-Zambia railway so that the goods will go east. So I can sort of see a bit of a pull of infrastructure. But until we see a change in those basic neo-colonial relations in which China imports goods, which are basically raw materials from Africa, and exports back to Africa finished goods, just like the West always said, it'll remain a very complicated relationship full of tension and full of geopolitical stress.
Yes. Professor, thank you for being with us on Firstpost Africa. As always, your valued insights are appreciated.
Thank you.
Shifting focus to Egypt, the Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi met with his Turkish counterpart Recep Tayyip Erdogan in Ankara on Wednesday. Now, this was the Egyptian leader's first visit to Turkey in 12 years and marks a new era in Ankara-Cairo ties after a decade of rift. Both the leaders expressed their will to deepen their cooperation as they met in the Turkish capital. This meeting comes in response to Turkish President Erdogan's visit to Cairo in February. The two leaders had then said that they turned over a new leaf in their ties. Now, in Ankara on Wednesday, the two leaders signed 17 cooperation agreements with commitments to improve relations in every area from trade to climate.
During our meeting with Mr. Sisi in Cairo, we had decided to restructure our high-level Strategic Cooperation Council. We held the first meeting of this mechanism today. With our joint declaration, we confirmed our will to advance our cooperation in all fields including industry, trade, defense, health, environment, and energy.
Turkey and Egypt have been at odds on various conflicts and political issues for years. Both nations cut ties in 2013 after El-Sisi, then Defense Minister of Egypt, led a coalition to remove President Mohamed Morsi, who was an ally of Turkey and part of the Muslim Brotherhood movement. Erdogan at the time had said that he would never speak to anyone like Sisi. But over the past 2 years, both nations have come closer as they aligned on several issues like the Israel-Hamas war. Last year, Ankara and Cairo mutually reappointed ambassadors, after which Erdogan had visited Cairo. Trade between the two nations also continued despite the rift. Turkey is Egypt's fifth largest trading partner, while Egypt is Turkey's largest partner in Africa. Now, the two leaders have said that they want to expand their annual commercial exchanges to $15 billion in the next 5 years. They also discussed the possible sale of Turkish drones to Egypt. Now, apart from bilateral cooperation, the two men also discussed various regional issues. On the Gaza war, they called for a ceasefire and greater deliveries of humanitarian aid to the besieged Palestinian population. Turkey has sent thousands of tons of aid to Egypt for Palestinians. It has also praised Cairo's humanitarian efforts and role as negotiator in the talks on a ceasefire and hostage deal.
I am concerned here to highlight the unity of Egypt and Turkey positions towards the demand for an immediate ceasefire and the rejection of the current Israeli escalation in the West Bank, and the call to start a path that achieves the aspirations of the Palestinian people to establish their independent state on the borders of June 4, 1967, with East Jerusalem as its capital.
Apart from Gaza, the two leaders also discussed the political situation in Libya, the war in Sudan, and the rift between Ethiopia and Somalia. Both sides agreed on the need to preserve the unity and territorial integrity of their ally Somalia. Ankara and Cairo have both recently signed military cooperation agreements with Somalia, which is in a standoff with Ethiopia after it signed a port deal with Somalia's breakaway region of Somaliland. Shifting focus to Senegal now, the Senegalese President Bassirou Diomaye Faye is set to dissolve the country's opposition-dominated parliament. This after the opposition announced a motion of censure against the government earlier this week. Threatened by the censure motion, Senegal's head of government, Prime Minister Ousmane Sonko, addressed his staff on Wednesday. He said that President Faye is planning to dissolve the parliament soon and initiate a major anti-corruption campaign. The parliament dissolution will effectively neutralize the motion of censure, which was announced in response to a bill put forward by the country's new government leaders. The bill sought to abolish two councils, the Council of Local Authorities and the Economic, Social and Environmental Council. Opposition believed the abolishment would pave the way to the dissolution of the National Assembly, which they currently dominate. So they launched the censure motion, which, as per Senegal's constitution, if adopted by a majority, would compel the government to resign. Now, Senegal's new government was installed less than 4 months ago, after President Faye swept the elections. However, the ruling coalition does not hold a majority in the parliament. So, amid the looming threat, the President and the Prime Minister want the Parliament to be dissolved. But as per reports, President Faye will only be able to do that from the 12th of September, exactly 24 months after the Parliament's first post-election session.
We've heard talk of a motion of censure, bringing down the government, but there will be no motion of censure. There are politicians who are completely overwhelmed by events, supported by their press. But I can assure you that there will be no motion of censure between now and 12th. And that on the 12th, God willing, these people will have something else to do than be MPs.
So the next week could be significant in Senegal's politics amid the escalating standoff between the ruling coalition and the opposition. The Prime Minister also said the government intended to present new public policy guidelines this month for the period up to 2050 and the coming 5 and 10 years. This could define the way Senegal, a relatively political stable country in Africa, is ruled for the coming years. And finally, to our special segment, Resurgent Africa. Amid the coups and the crises, there are many positive stories from Africa that often get overlooked, but not on this show. Our story today is from Morocco. A circus school in the city of Saly is transforming the lives of young people by offering professional circus arts training. Students from all walks of life are accepted in this school, who undergo a minimum of 3 years of training. Our report gets you all the details about how these youngsters are getting a second chance at life.
In the vibrant tapestry of Moroccan culture, traditions like storytelling, acrobatics, sacred music, and the rhythmic beats of Nava coexist, along with religious celebrations and urban festivities. Now, a unique opportunity for the youth has emerged in the city of Saly, in the form of circus arts. At the center of this is the Shems Circus School. It was established in 2009, and it is not just teaching circus arts, but offering a lifeline to young people, giving them a chance to rewrite their futures. The school's mission goes beyond mere entertainment. It's about social integration through the rigorous training of circus arts. The students, who often come from challenging backgrounds, undergo a demanding training regimen that can last anywhere from 3 to 4.5 years.
The first time I came to the circus, I was accompanied by 2 friends, and we just wanted to see the place and see what the training was like. They told us there was an audition, and we decided to take it. They gave us all the information we needed about the process and how to become an artist. We liked it. We thought it was better to spend our time here rather than waste it on the streets with no guarantees or anything.
This training is not just about learning the tricks of the trade, but also about shaping them into professionals with a deep understanding of the art and the discipline it requires. The curriculum alternates between hands-on training at the National Circus School and real-world professional performance, hence providing students with a well-rounded education in both artistic and technical aspects of the circus profession. While the institution began as a simple setup to support street children and offer them a second chance, it has now evolved into a fully fledged school dedicated to the art of circus. The evolution of Shems from a humble association to a respected school reflects its broader mission: to open doors for its graduates.
As far as the school is concerned, it wasn't always a school, but an association set up to help street children and give them a second chance. Today, the school has grown and welcomes young people from all walks of life who are not necessarily orphans. For example, although I live with a family in Kenitra, I chose to come here to train in the circus arts.
Not just in circus, but in any performing arts field. With the professional training and certification they receive, students are equipped to pursue careers in various artistic disciplines, including acting.
I believe that training or graduating from SHEMS is quite comprehensive and can enable them to integrate very broad companies, not only in circus but also in acting, for example. When I see them, I want to work with them even on other projects, for example.
The SHEMS Circus School is a beacon of hope and opportunity, demonstrating that with the right support and training, young people can transform their lives and pursue careers they may never have dreamed possible. The school is not just a place of learning, it's a place of transformation where the art of the circus becomes a pathway to a brighter future.
And that's it on the show for today. We will see you again tomorrow at the same time. Thank you for watching and goodbye. Hello and welcome to Fast and Factual on Firstpost, where we get you the top 50 stories from around the world. I'm Alyson Grange, coming to you live from Durban, South Africa. Let's begin. In our top stories, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has made fresh remarks about a possible ceasefire in Gaza. He said that Israel will agree to a